Today we are going to take a look at Unbroken Chapter 2, which is called Run Like Mad. You hopefully remember that Louie was just a total troublemaker in Chapter 1, but at the very end of Chapter 1 we saw that Louie was realizing he really needed to get it together or he was going to get into some more serious trouble. And so this is now teenage Louie as we start out Chapter 2, which is on page 13. Please follow along as I read, either in your own book or you can follow along here on the screen. Here we go. And this word rehabilitation, think about rehab is giving up something that's maybe bad for you, turning your life around into a more positive, so it's on a positive path, positive trajectory. So this is going to be Louie's rehab. He's re-entering society in a positive way. The rehabilitation of Louie Zamperini began in 1931 with a key. 14-year-old Louie was in a locksmith shop when he heard someone say that if you put any key in any lock, it has a 1 in 50 chance of fitting. Inspired, Louie began collecting keys and trying locks. He had no luck until he tried his house key on the back door of the Torrance High gym. When basketball season began, there was an inexplicable or unexplainable discrepancy or difference between the number of 10-cent tickets sold and the considerably larger number of kids in the bleachers. So he's sneaking in and he's giving kids free tickets to the basketball games. In late 1931, someone caught on, and Louie was hauled to the principal's office for the umpteenth time. In California, winter-born students entered new grades in January, so Louie was about to start 9th grade. The principal punished him by making him ineligible for athletic and social activities. Louie, who never joined anything, was indifferent. When Pete learned what had happened, he headed straight to the principal's office. Though his mother didn't yet speak much English, he towed her along to give his presentation weight. He told the principal that Louie craved attention, but had never won it in the form of praise, so he sought it in the form of punishment. If Louie were recognized for doing something right, Pete argued, he'd turn his life around. And there's our Louie here. If the principal allowed Louie to join a sport, it says, he asked the principal to allow Louie to join a sport. When the principal balked, Pete asked him if he could live with allowing Louie to fail. It was a cheeky thing for a 16-year-old to say to his principal, but Pete was the one kid in Torrance who could get away with such a remark and make it persuasive. Louie was made eligible for athletics for 1932. Remember, Pete is a great kid. Everybody loves him, so he convinces the principal to make Louie play sports. Pete had big plans for Louie. A senior in 1931 and 32, he would graduate with 10 varsity letters, including 3 in basketball and 3 in baseball. But it was track in which he earned 4 varsity letters, tied the school half-mile record, and set its mile record of 5 minutes 6 seconds. That was his true forte. Looking at Louie, whose getaway speed was a saving grace, Pete thought he saw the same incipient talent. Remember, Louie has to run away from everyone, and he's really fast. As it turned out, it wasn't Pete who got Louie onto a track for the first time. It was Louie's weakness for girls. In February, the 9th grade girls began assembling a team for an interclass track meet, and in class with only 4 boys, Louie was the only male who looked like he could run. The girls worked their charms, and Louie found himself standing on the track barefoot for a 660-yard race. When everyone ran, he followed, churning along with jimmying elbows and dropping far behind. As he labored home last, he heard tittering. Gasping and humiliated, he ran straight off the track and hid under the bleachers. The coach muttered something about how the kid belonged anywhere but in a foot race. "He's my brother," Pete replied. From that day on, Pete was all over Louie, forcing him to train, then dragging him to the track to run in a second meet. Urged on by kids in the stands, Louie put in just enough effort to beat one boy and finish 3rd. He hated running, but the applause was intoxicating, and the prospect of more was just enough incentive to keep him marginally compliant. So he likes when people cheer for him, and it's enough to keep him kind of sort of listening to Pete in training because he loves people cheering for him. Pete herded him out to train every day and rode his bicycle behind him, whacking him with a stick. Louie dragged his feet, belly ached, and quit at the first sign of fatigue or tiredness. Pete made him get up and keep going. Louie started winning. At the season's end, he became the first Torrance kid to make the all-city finals. He finished 5th. Pete had been right about Louie's talent, but to Louie, training felt more like one more constraint. At night, he listened to the whistles of passing trains, and one day, in the summer of '32, he couldn't bear it any longer. It began over a chore that Louie's father asked him to do. Louie resisted, a spat ensued, and Louie threw some clothes into a bag and stormed toward the front door. His parents ordered him to stay. Louie was beyond persuasion. As he walked out, his mother rushed to the kitchen and emerged with a sandwich wrapped in wax paper. Louie stuffed it in his bag and left. He was partway down the front walk when he heard his name called. When he turned, there was his father, grim-faced, holding $2 in his outstretched hand. It was a lot of money for a man whose paycheck didn't bridge the week. Louie took it and walked away. He rounded up a friend, and together they hitchhiked to Los Angeles, broke into a car, and slept on the seats. The next day they jumped a train, climbed onto the roof, and rode north. The trip was a nightmare. The boys got locked in a boxcar so hot that they were soon frantic to escape. Louie found a discarded strip of metal, climbed onto his friend's shoulders, pried a vent open, squirmed out, and helped his friend out, badly cutting himself in the process. Then they were discovered by the railroad detective, who forced them to jump from the moving train at gunpoint. After several days of walking, getting chased out of the orchards and grocery stores where they tried to steal food, they wound up sitting on the ground in a rail yard, filthy, bruised, sunburned, and wet, sharing a stolen can of beans. A train rattled past. Louie looked up. I saw beautiful white tablecloths and crystal on the tables and food, people laughing and enjoying themselves and eating, he said later. And I was sitting here shivering, eating a miserable can of beans. He remembered the money in his father's hand, the fear in his mother's eyes as she offered him a sandwich. He stood up and headed home. So for Louie, it's kind of this experience of running away that's going to make him appreciate his home more. When Louie walked into his house, Louise threw her arms around him, inspected him for injuries, led him to the kitchen, and gave him a cookie. Anthony came home, saw Louie, and sank into a chair, his face soft with relief. After dinner, Louie went upstairs, dropped into bed, and whispered his surrender to Pete. So this is kind of Louie's rock bottom for now. He realizes he does need his family. It's worth training and getting into track and turning his life around. In the summer of 1932, Louie did almost nothing but run. On the invitation of a friend, he went to stay at a cabin on the Cahuilla Indian Reservation in Southern California's high desert. Each morning he rose with the sun, picked up his rifle, and jogged into the sagebrush. He ran up and down hills, over the desert, through gullies. He chased bands of horses, darting into the swirling herds and trying in vain to snatch a fistful of mane and swing aboard. He swam in a sulphur spring, watched over by Cahuilla women scrubbing clothes on the rocks, and stretched out to dry himself in the sun. On his run back to the cabin each afternoon, he shot a rabbit for supper. Each evening, he climbed atop the cabin and lay back, reading Zane Grey novels. When the sun sank and the words faded, he gazed over the landscape, moved by its beauty, watching it slip from gray to purple before darkness blended land and sky. In the morning, he rose to run again. He didn't run from something or to something, not for anyone or in spite of anyone. He ran because it was what his body wished to do. The restiveness, the self-consciousness, and the need to oppose disappeared. All he felt was peace. He came home with a mania for running. All of the effort that he'd once put into thieving, he threw into track. On Pete's instruction, he ran his entire paper route for the Torrance Herald to and from school and to the beach and back. He rarely stayed on the sidewalk, veering onto the neighbors' lawns to hurdle bushes. He gave up drinking and smoking. To expand his lung capacity, or like how much he can hold his breath, he ran to the public pool at Redondo Beach, dove to the bottom, grabbed the drain plug, and just floated there, hanging on a little longer each time. Eventually, he could stay underwater for 3 minutes and 45 seconds. People kept jumping in to save him. If you're wondering if that's a long time, give it a shot. I cannot even close to hold my breath that long, so good job, Louie. Also, this Redondo Beach is not our Redondo. He's in California, but nice that we got the same name. Louie also found a role model. In the 1930s, track was hugely popular, and its elite performers were household names. Among them was a Kansas University miler named Glenn Cunningham. As a small child, Cunningham had been in a schoolhouse explosion that killed his brother and left Glenn with severe burns on his legs and torso. It It was a month and a half before he could sit up, and more time still before he could stand. Unable to straighten his legs, he learned to push himself about by leaning on a chair, his legs floundering. He graduated to the tail of the family mule, and eventually, hanging off the tail of an obliging horse named Paint, he began to run. So this guy, Glenn Cunningham, is a famous runner, and he was burned so badly that he couldn't even walk. And then he starts to hold on to a mule and then a horse for balance to teach himself how to run. He had a gait, or like a way of walking astride, that initially caused him excruciating pain, or really, really intense pain. Within a few years, he was racing, setting the mile records, and obliterating his opponents by the length of a homestretch. By 1932, the modest, mild-tempered Cunningham, whose legs and back were covered in a twisting mesh of scars, was becoming a national sensation, soon to be acclaimed as the greatest miler in American history. Louie had his hero. In the fall of 1932, Pete began his studies at Compton, a tuition-free junior college where he became a star runner. Nearly every afternoon, he commuted home to coach Louie, running alongside him, subduing the jimmying elbows, and teaching him strategy. Louie had a rare biomechanical advantage, hips that rolled as he ran. When one leg reached forward, the corresponding hip swung forward with it, giving Louie an exceptionally efficient 7-foot stride. So saying Louie's body's kind of built for running. After watching him from the Torrance High fence, cheerleader Toots Bowersox needed only one word to describe him: smooth. Pete thought that the sprints in which Louie had been running were too short. He'd be a miler, just like Glenn Cunningham. In January 1933, Louie began 10th grade. As he lost his aloof, unfriendly, kind of awkward, thorny manner, he was welcomed by the fashionable crowd. They invited him to wing-bakes in front of Kello's hamburger stand, where Louie would join ukulele songs and touch football games played with a knotted towel, contest that inevitably ended with a cheerleader being wedged into a trash can. Capitalizing on his sudden popularity, Louie ran for class president and won, borrowing the speech that Pete had used to win his class presidency at Compton. Best of all, girls suddenly found him dreamy. While walking alone on his 16th birthday, Louie was ambushed by a giggling gaggle of cheerleaders. One girl sat on Louie while the rest gave him 16 whacks on the rear, plus one to grow on. When the school track season began in February, Louie set out to see what training had done for him. His transformation was stunning. Competing in black silk shorts that his mother had sewn from the fabric of a skirt, he won an 880-yard race, breaking the school record, co-held by Pete, by more than 2 seconds. A week later, he ran a field of milers off their feet, stopping the watches in 5:03, 3 seconds faster than Pete's record. At another meet, he clocked a mile in 4:58. 3 weeks later, he set a state record of 4:56. By early April, he was down to 4:46. By late April, 4:42. Boy, oh boy, read a local paper. Can that guy fly? Yes, this means that Zamperini guy. Almost every week, Louie ran the mile, streaking through the season unbeaten and untested. When he ran out of high school kids to whip, he took on Pete and 13 other college runners in a 2-mile race at Compton. Though he was only 16 and had never even trained at that distance, he won by 50 yards. Next, he tried the 2-mile in UCLA's Southern California cross-country meet, running so effortlessly that he couldn't feel his feet touching the ground. He took the lead and kept pulling away. At the halfway point, he was an 1/8 of a mile ahead, and observers began speculating on when the boy in the black shorts was going to collapse. Louie didn't collapse. After he flew past the finish, rewriting the course record, he looked back up the long straightaway. Not one of the other runners was even in view. Louie had won by more than 1/4 of a mile. He felt as if he would faint, but it wasn't from the exertion. It was from the realization of what he was. And you can see here it says this is Louie winning the 1933 2-mile race. There's nobody even close to him. And that is our end of chapter 2. Hope you enjoyed it. Keep following along and we'll do chapter 3 next.